to a special episode of the MHR podcast. I'm Emma.
And I'm Andy.
And this week we are joined again by the lovely Jules because we want to have a conversation about World Menopause Day.
Yeah.
This is brought up every year on the 18th of October as a way to try and not only raise awareness but also break the stigma around the topic. Because it needs to become more of a prevalent conversation, not only in our day-to-day lives, but also in the workplace and how we can provide a safer and more kind of welcoming environment for those that are perhaps going through that change. Yeah. So that's really what I wanted to bring, yourself on today to talk about, Jules. Because as we know, menopause isn't just a gender or an age issue. It can impact everybody in different ways, whether directly or indirectly. And it's important that we are feeling comfortable to have those conversations about it and be able to talk more openly about it. So just wanted to start off by going through some, stats that we've seen here. We've got women aged 50 and over are the fastest growing group in the workforce.
Yes.
And the average age for a menopause transition is 51. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see more and more women in the workplace that are going through those transitions. And what are your thoughts initially on sort of how that's sort of managed at the moment?
I think it's just really important, as you were talking about stats there, to just think about there's 13 million people in the UK going through menopause right now. It's a huge amount of people. You're absolutely right. We've got, what was the stat about the how many women in the workforce, or was it?
So women aged 50 are the fastest growing group.
Growing.
So 3 out of 5 working women between 45 and 55
are
experiencing menopause symptoms at the moment.
Absolutely. So it's a huge impact on those individuals, but also the people around them and also the workforce then as well. So I think breaking down stigmas, people don't talk about the menopause. It's a bit of a taboo subject,
and it feels
isn't
like
it?
From a position of being naive, that is half the problem.
Yeah.
Because there are stigmas and people are afraid to socially talk about these or don't understand how we should do, I think we're growing stigmas or relying on assumptions of something we don't understand and not enabling ourselves to have an actual productive conversation. And that's why I found this so interesting, like reading these stats, educating myself about it it is clearly something that we need to be more aware of because it's so prevalent, yet we have such a little understanding of, or there's still so many silly stigmas existing in the workplace.
And of course, it's nothing new. This is something that women go through from the the dawns of time, so it isn't anything new. However, I think what we've seen is people tend to talk more about it outside of the workplace, but inside the workplace, it's perhaps still an area that isn't discussed as much, and people don't feel that they're able to talk about the symptoms that they might be suffering and experiencing. And the trouble is that it ranges so much. So some people can fly through the menopause, not even know that it's happened to them. However, that's not the same for everyone. And there are, some women that go through the menopause and the symptoms are really quite debilitating and can impact on every part of their life. So therefore, it's only natural that that's going to impact on their working life. And we know that, 41% of women in the workplace who are going through menopause, really struggle to keep on top of their workload. Because of the symptoms that they're suffering. So I think it's definitely worth conversations at work and trying to make people feel more open to discussing what's really going on. We know, and it's hard to report on, and there aren't any definitive statistics on how much time is taken off due to menopause symptoms, simply because those people who feel that they can't be in work on that particular day because of the symptoms they're suffering won't say that it's due to menopause, are more likely to say, oh, I've got a migraine or
got a
something, I've got a
cold
cold or something like that, which is perhaps a bit more relatable to other people. So we haven't got stats on how much time is lost or how much time people are taking out of work, and how much it's actually impacting on them being productive in the workplace for themselves.
And it's interesting, and another element that we've got up here, that actually, you know, as a result of this, 1 in 10 menopausal colleagues end up leaving, you know, end up resigning entirely because of the symptoms that they're facing. And some of the bigger ones that come up here are, you know, the things you would typically associate, such as hot flushes, night sweats.
Yeah.
But actually, something, and I know we had a little bit of a discussion about this yesterday, something that has quite a significant impact on working life is brain fog and imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and I think this is something that perhaps people don't maybe even recognise themselves that it's happening. But I can speak from personal experience, if you're happy for that, is that I know that I used to pride myself on my memory, and I've never had a photographic memory, but I have really good memory,
Not quite Rain Man.
No, not quite. But you know, a really good, strong memory, and you know, if you give me somebody's name, I know where they work, who they work for, all of that stuff that's associated with them. It just comes back to me, that recall. However, not so much now, and you know, I might laugh and joke about it with my manager, who's very understanding, because he's also going through the same time of life as me. And I'll say, if I don't write it down, I'll forget it. And we make a joke of it, but actually it really does impact on how I feel about how I'm performing. Yeah. And if I think about it, we might make light of it and make a joke, but actually it can lead to that imposter syndrome where I might be thinking, oh God, what are they thinking of me? Am I doing well in my work? You know, and you start to have that self-doubt creep in.
And having that, even if you feel like you're in a supported managerial environment, is still a lot of pressure and it's still a lot of stress. Not everyone has that as well, because again, with all this naivety and with people struggling to talk about this or admit that how they're feeling is because of something they may feel embarrassed about, there are obviously a lot more situations that might be different where someone isn't able to communicate how they're feeling or what they're going through to another manager who completely doesn't understand it. Exactly. Whether or not because they can't experience that, or because they're naive, or they don't know how to address that problem, which is only going to exacerbate that stress.
Yeah,
so there is a responsibility for managers, at least, to be more educated about how to talk about this and how to support employees.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, it's a very personal journey. And also there will be some people who feel really quite ashamed, which they shouldn't, and that's easy to say, or you shouldn't be ashamed. It's something very normal and very natural. Yes, it is. We know all of that, but it still doesn't stop it. That people do feel
it's extremely personal.
It's very, very personal, and you know, my symptoms might be very, very different from my colleagues' symptoms, but we're actually still going through the same journey, and we know that you can be symptomatic, have menopause symptoms, you know, on average up to 7 years. It's a long time, and you can, you know, if you're not careful, you can start to think that you're not good at your job anymore. So I can understand why that 1 in 10, although it's quite a shocking statistic, can actually happen. And then the impact on the workforce for that is you could be losing some fantastic skills, knowledge and experience. Because actually, if we think of that older generation, which is where the majority of people, not all, experience the menopause, you know, they have that experience in the workplace, and if that's going, that can be really detrimental for the productivity of an organisation.
And you mentioned just there as well, obviously, about typically expected age ranges, but actually there's a stat here that you've collected here, Emma, that says around 1 in 100 women experience the menopause before 40 years of age.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Another thing we need to be considerate of.
Really, and that's the thing about not pigeonholing people of a certain age, or it can't be happening to you because you're only in your 20s. You know, there's so many different reasons why people might go into early menopause. Some are unknown. And it just happens. It's rare, but it does happen. But it could be as a result of certain medical interventions that may have happened in your life that brings on early menopause as well. So yes, whilst it is fact that for the majority of women, the average age is around the 50, 51 mark, that's not across the board. And again, it's about understanding that if somebody who is a much younger age happens to say to their manager, actually, I've got menopausal symptoms, you don't just dismiss that out of hand and say, well, that can't be right.
Yeah.
It might be unusual, but actually we know that that can happen.
So what would your advice be to, say, an HR professional like yourself or a business leader in how they can ensure that their employees feel supported and understood whilst they're going through a process such as this?
I think it's just about very much the same or similar lines as when we've talked previously about mental health conversations and wellbeing conversations. It comes under that wellbeing umbrella, really. We're talking about physical changes in people which have symptoms that display in all manner of ways. It could be those, like you said, those hot flashes. They're what's probably one of the most well-known symptoms that happens. And, you know, these could be quite mild or they can be really, really quite severe, and people can feel really quite concerned about them, what other people might think. And I think from a manager perspective, it's about having those open conversations, that reassurance that actually you are still you doing the great fantastic work that you're doing, and if you need to pop out, get some fresh air for a moment, then you go and do that. So it's kind of those little reasonable adjustments that we make in day to day to accommodate whatever is required, so that somebody can best perform in their role.
So it's just ensuring really that education is in place on what to look out for.
Yeah.
And then also having that mindfulness of then how to respond and to react to that.
Yeah.
No, definitely. And it's all, like you say, it's also just trying to be quite open about that conversation. You know, it's not anything to be ashamed of. It's not
No.
anything to feel like you can't talk about quite openly in the workplace. And like we discussed in the mental health episode that we had a couple of weeks ago, we're trying to make these things less and less of a taboo subject.
Yes.
It shouldn't, you know, we're not in the older generations where it was, you know, stiff upper lip, everything's fine, don't worry about it. Actually, we need to be more open about these things to make not only a safer workplace and a safer culture for people to work in, but also, you know, from an employee's point of view, it could also make a more productive workplace because they can feel that they can be how they need to be able to perform in their roles comfortably.
Definitely.
Because if someone is trying to really squish that down, like you've said, certainly where it presents itself in a physical way, they could make themselves feel worse by trying to really sort of squish that down. Whereas, as you quite rightly said, you can make adjustments when
definitely.
That awareness
And
is
I
there.
think one of the symptoms that really took me by surprise was the feelings of anxiety. Now, I don't suffer with anxiety. That's a completely different thing. I don't suffer with anxiety disorder. However, I've found at this time in my life that I've had more periods of feeling anxious about things that I wouldn't normally have done, which is unusual for me and unsettling. But what I feel very positive about, I'm privileged, is that I've got a line manager who I can talk to about that, and I can say, oh, you know, and they've, you know, it doesn't stop me doing the job, but she's able to get some perspective back with me, and also be able to talk about the symptoms that she's had to be able to relate, which is a great position to be in. So I have a female manager of a similar age to me. I feel very, very lucky in that respect. Not everybody has that.
Yeah.
If you're in perhaps a male-dominated industry, it might not be as easy a conversation.
Yeah.
It might be. I hope it is, and I'd love it to be, but it might not be because the resonance isn't there, that empathy piece where you just know.
There's, I guess with that, there's still probably that natural uncomfortableness because it's not something that person can instantly relate to.
No.
You know, even if they know it's coming in the future. Like, you know, speaking as somebody in their late 20s, I can't relate to those symptoms right now, but I do know that they're on the way. It's going to happen at some point. So there's still that middle ground that we can almost sort of discuss it on, but it's not the same for everybody. Okay, so I think where we can wrap it up there is that it's really important as businesses to create more education and awareness around menopause and, you know, the way that it can affect employees, in different ways. And having that mindfulness about creating that open culture and that safe environment where they feel like they can, you know, be able to deal with it in a way that they feel most comfortable to do so.
And the route to that is education. Learn about it, educate yourself, be aware of what's happening, acknowledge that if it can't happen to you, you know it's got to happen to someone else. So you need to know how. You can't have full empathy, but if you can understand the situation, you can support it better.
Exactly. And what we will do as part of this podcast today is we will leave some resources in the blurb section of the podcast so that if you are wanting to take the time to learn a little bit more about what menopause means and certainly how it can be managed, you know, in a nicer way, I guess, in the workplace, then we will leave some there for you guys to peruse over. But thank you so much for joining. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you for joining us for our special. As always, if you want to find out a little bit more about what we do, please visit the website mhrglobal.com, and we will continue to do our podcast on the world of work for HR, payroll and finance. We are busy.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jules.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. I've been Emma.
I've been Andy.
And I've been Jules.
We'll
We'll
see you next week. See you next week.